All right. Hello, AP Government people. I'm creating this presentation, this video, so that I can just go through the Google Slides. I thought it would be just a good way for me to reteach so you can review all the key material. Remember, this is just the basics, so you're going to want to go back and more specific. If I go over something you're not really sure, you don't really remember that, go back and try to find that in the actual lectures. Or if you're confused about anything, please let me know, ask me questions and that kind of stuff. It's a little hard to see me right now. It's a little darker than it was, so sorry about that. All right, so let's jump in. Okay, so first of all, the AP Government exam is going to be an at-home exam. The date is going to be May 11th, 1 p.m. So if you cannot meet that date, there will be a makeup exam. That's going to be in June, but you have to let them know that you're going to be doing the makeup exam, basically. So if you know that date's not going to work out for you, please let me know right away so we can figure out a way to get you scheduled for that later exam. Okay, so it's 45 minutes total, basically. You're going to have 25 minutes to read and respond to the first question, which is basically an argument essay, and they're going to have 5 minutes to upload your response. As far as I understand, and I haven't worked with the platform yet. They said that they'll push that out there in the next couple of weeks so we can play around with it before the test. But basically, from what I understand, is you'll be able to either handwrite it, and then take a picture, and then upload that, email that, or submit it through whatever platform they have. Or you can open it up on a computer, and then you can type your response in. That's another option too, and then submit like that. So that really is, for me, I'm a handwrite person, so I would choose the handwrite option. But some of you guys are faster typers, some of you prefer the typing. So that's really up to you. I don't think there's any advantage one or the other. It just depends on your skill set or what's your preference on that one. Basically, then you have another question, and you're going to have 15 minutes to answer that question. That question is going to be similar to the normal question 1, which is basically a concept application. Very simple question, usually only has 3 parts. And basically, you're going to read a scenario, something that we don't know, or we haven't read yet, could be made up, could be an actual real life thing that happened. And then they're going to be like, what does this relate to, or what is this about, or what is all that kind of stuff. You just have to apply your concept knowledge, basically. So some students have asked me, do we need to study for this exam because it is open note? You absolutely need to study for this exam if you want to pass, for sure. Because even though that it's open note, and some of you think, oh, that's what an advantage that is to, have all this stuff in front of you. And while there are certain advantages that, yes, the type of test that they will design will not play to those types of questions. So you definitely need to study. You need to get this fresh in your brain and all this kinds of stuff. Because I'll start throwing some words at you, and you might go, oh, I don't remember that at all. We learned this back in August. So this is really, really deep back in your brain. So depending on the level of invest you made when you learned it the first time, and the studying you did to prepare for your old unit tests and that kind of stuff. Either way, though, you can totally jump back in. Even if you didn't make the investment the first time around, you still have the opportunity to jump back in right now, learn this stuff, so then you can go, okay, I could write an essay about this. I definitely could do that. Okay. So basically then you have, once you submit question 1, 2, you can't go back too. They said that. So you submit that, you're going to go, honestly, then you're going to be so focused on the next question, I don't think it's really going to matter, but you don't have the chance to edit. So if you think of something else, too bad. Okay. So, argument essay. Another students were asking me, is it weighted the same because there's 2 questions? No, it is slightly weighted more towards the question 1, which is the argument essay. So that's going to be 60% of your score. And they gave us the rubric here. Basically, the big thing about this question, and this is the same one that I graded last year in Salt Lake City, basically you need a thesis. I spent hours hunting for students and if they actually wrote a thesis, because without it, they weren't able to get a lot of points and stuff like that. So that's the first thing. However this thing is designed, it's going to be an either or, where you can, they'll be like, should it be this or that? And then you're going to take either road. And you basically have to defend that. You can't try to hedge and go, well, both are right. No. You got to be like, this is right because this, and defend it and support it and all that kinds of stuff, basically. So you develop your line of reasoning. They're going to give you 3 foundational documents. There's 9 total. So there's not that many. There's 3 that they'll give you, or 2 or 3 that they'll give you. And then basically you can use those to try to support your claim. In different parts of the document, that you can use, and there's different, students can get really creative with this and stuff like that. As long as it supports it, usually we accept it if it, holds true. So provide evidence from a second foundational document or knowledge from course concepts to support the claim. So you basically have to have a argument. You're going to say, I believe this because, and you have to have 2 reasons, basically 2 evidence pieces that support that. So those evidence pieces, one has to be one of those foundational documents, and then another can be one of the other foundational documents, or it could be something you learned from the course, something you learned from, history or anything like that, basically. So your historical knowledge, or you're just, thinking about these can definitely help you just reviewing this stuff, even though it might not be actually the documents. You can be like, oh, but I remember this happened and Andrew Jackson didn't actually enforce the Supreme Court decision. So that's an example from history where I'm using to support my, argument of blah, 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 whatever. Okay. Anyways, sorry. So basically, then you have to explain your reasoning too. So you have to have a thesis, you have to have evidence, and then you have to explain the evidence and provide reasoning on how it connects back to your thesis. So it's not super difficult. Those of you who are familiar with, traditional argument essays, this is exactly it. So you're just going to follow that format, basically. So then the argument essay, this right here, if you go through it, if you want to read through it, this is basically the scoring rubric for it. Basically, you have a thesis or you don't for the first part. It's either there or it's not. They told us to, which meant hard as readers. It can be anywhere, really. But I'm going to recommend you put that in the first paragraph. I'm going to recommend you underline it too. Make the job easy for your reader. That's something that I learned. You don't have to do that stuff, but these kinds of things make it really easy for someone who reads 1,000 essays in a day, basically. Okay, so changes. What are the changes? Oh, so no changes to row one. Still need a thesis. That's not a change. It changes from the other format, basically. They added another point to row B. So for that second evidence piece, basically. For row C, they also added another piece for another point for evidence or for reasoning and explaining your evidence, basically. And then there used to be, and I have a big X through this, there used to be a requirement that you put like an alternative perspective or like, some say this or others argue this, that kind of stuff. You don't need that now, so please don't include that. You're not even going to basically acknowledge that there's another side. You're going to just go, I'm totally right, and this is why, and let me just reason that out for you so you understand and that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's go through this. These are our foundational documents. Now, again, you don't need to memorize these. This is kind of nice, especially with the Federalist Papers, because we used to have to do a lot of recall with which is 7810, all that kind of stuff. But you do need to know the crux of them, the main ideas behind them. And knowing that, too, and thinking about these can really help you as you're trying to figure out, how am I going to defend an argument that they're asking me to do? So first one is Declaration of Independence. That's basically just explaining the separation from Great Britain. And like listing all the grievances, and then also explaining like the reasons why we have government and popular sovereignty and stuff like that. The Articles of Confederation is another document that was the original failed plan for government, basically. So big part about that is state sovereignty, basically. The states had all the power and they had total control. You had a really weak central government under that. Federalist 10 is all about factions. Factions, remember, are those like scary or like, what did Madison define them as? Is like groups that are with interests adverse to the community is what he said. So basically people trying to take rights away, the majority trying to take rights away from the minority, basically. And his whole thing about this is like, look, factions are gonna happen. So what's the solution? Not democracy, not a large democracy, because you're gonna have mobs take over and no good. His solution is large republic, basically. You don't need a small democracy, you need a large republic because you need to basically protect the group as a whole. And if there's one group that starts trying to take over, then the group as a whole will basically stop that faction or stop that group so they can't take over the whole group. Okay, Fed 51 is basically all about separation of powers and checks and balances, basically explaining it, defending it, explaining why it's necessary and why also there's going to be an additional check with them. It's like the Congress will be the strongest branch, but there'll be an additional check with them because we're dividing up the Congress too. So there's checks on top of these checks and balances and all this kind of stuff. Basically, that's Madison just saying, hey, this is a good system and this is why. Let me tell you. Okay. Fed 70, now we're jumping into Hamilton. So Hamilton wrote this one. You don't need to know who wrote it, so I shouldn't say that, but whatever. Hamilton should get credit for it, for sure. He wrote this, and basically Fed 70 is all about explaining why we should just have one president. We only need one president, basically, Hamilton said. Many is going to be a problem. First of all, how do you hold them accountable? What if there's an emergency? I mean, imagine right now if there was multiple presidents, and one of them's like, oh, we should have stay-at-home orders, or no, we shouldn't, or this kind of, it just creates all kinds of confusion and all that kinds of stuff. We even still deal with that with the state and federal level, so we don't need, multiple presidents, basically. Okay, Fed 78 is all about the judiciary, basically explaining the judicial branch and also explaining why, yes, defending why they need to have life terms, defending why they should not be elected because we don't want them accountable to the people. We want them accountable to the Constitution. And basically saying, look, don't worry about it because they're not going to have any power. He's like, they're not going to have the sword or the purse. What does that mean, the sword or the purse? It just means basically that, they won't have enforcement power, the sword. They're not the president or the executive branch. And they don't have any money. So, if there's something really bad that they try to do, the Congress will just be like, yeah, okay, well, no money then. And then it's like, oh, okay, so then we'll stop. So basically he's like, yeah, I know you're scared about this. Don't be scared. They're not going to be that powerful. Basically is what he said. Okay, anyways, Brutus 1 is it's the only anti-federalist paper there is. Anti-federalist paper. Brutus is basically like, hey guys, I don't think this Constitution is such a good thing. I really think that it's bad. And he basically specifically identifies the necessary and proper clause and the supremacy clause and said, hey, check it out. They're just going to take away the states. This is just like a ruse, basically, he's like afraid of. And, and some of the points that he makes, because I remember I went back and read that recently, and I was like, he's got some good points that he's making there, but also some of it's like really paranoid and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, no, that didn't really happen, that kinds of stuff. So anyways, Brutus 1 is just on anti-federalist paper saying we shouldn't have the Constitution. It's dangerous. He's more about the small democracies. He doesn't agree with Madison. So it's basically a total counter argument to Fed 10, basically. The Constitution, we should know that one. Also, the Bill of Rights and the other amendments. Now, from what I understand, too, you can use those as two separate documents. It's kind of cool. The original Constitution, so everything pre-Bill of Rights, and then everything amendments 1 through 27 afterwards. Basically, the structure of our government. If you don't know the Constitution, send me an email. I'll let you know. It's a good thing. All right. So, letter from a Birmingham jail. This one we did not really get to go in depth on. I don't think we didn't get to do a whole worksheet on it. I just think we ran out of time on that one. Basically, this one, it's kind of a really unique document in this set because it's really far removed. Like the Constitution is, in the 1700s, late 1700s, and then you've got letter from Birmingham jail, 1963. So, and all of those are before the Constitution. So, okay. Basically, this is just them. There's some similar things that I'm noticing, though, with this. There's popular sovereignty in there. So there's definitely some themes that he talks about that you could pull from other documents and stuff like that. But basically, it's all just about the civil rights movement and explaining, breaking unjust laws and the purpose behind that and that kind of stuff. So there's definitely some similarities between that and the Declaration of Independence, for sure. All men are created equal. He's like, we're just trying to strive for that and that kind of stuff. But it's a unique document because it is very far removed and it's not really foundational because it wasn't at the creation of the country. It's more foundational for the civil rights movement, basically. Anyways, okay, let's keep going. So I have this graphic organizer. Check it out. There's a link there for that. If you fill it out, I recommend it. Do it or don't, but I just recommend it if you're a paper pencil person, if you want to put it on a Google Doc, just to put your stuff into one place. I think it's really, really good. I think it's valuable. Okay. Question 2 is all about concept analysis. So question 2 is basically 40% of your grade. And this is basically going to be a really simple question. They're going to give you a scenario. You're going to read the scenario, and then you're going to respond to it and explain how it affects the political institution, behavior, or process. So my guess is it's going to be one of the 3 branches. That would just be a hunch. It's not going to be anything with political parties. It's not going to be anything with the Electoral College. I'm trying to think just around what units are covered in there and that kinds of stuff. That's about it that I get. Oh, it won't be political polls. Those won't be included. But a lot of the stuff that we have can be included in that. So my guess would be the 3 branches, but I don't know for sure. So transfer understanding of course concepts, apply them to. So basically, you just need to transfer your understanding. That's why you can't copy this stuff. You can't, it's going to be a new scenario and you have to understand these concepts to really go, oh, that's just like this one that we learned about. You really can't Google this kinds of stuff. So you really don't want to invest and have this stuff fresh in your brain. If you try to just go back to your notes from 6 months ago, but it's really not a wise strategy, I would say. Okay, so I've got rubrics there for that too. I recommend you just go ahead and look through that. But basically, it's you earn the point or you don't, as usual on the FRQs. Okay, how to submit and tech tips. So for this one, basically, you can handwrite your answers. You can take a picture. You can upload it. Or you can type on a computer. You can submit your response. What are my tips? I would say make sure you have a device charged and plugged in. Make sure it's ready to go. I would say make sure you have a good internet connection. And I would say practice with the College Board upload tools when they come out. And I will definitely do some work with that, and we can mess around with that stuff, make sure we understand it, so that you can feel confident that you can meet that 5-minute deadline. That's what I would stress most about, honestly. It's, if I knew my stuff, I mean, obviously I didn't know that I'd stress because I was like, oh, I don't know this stuff. Well, then you're probably not going to pass anyways. If I knew my stuff, I would be stressed because I would be like, oh, what if I write the best essay ever and I upload it in 6 minutes and not 5? Yeah, no, that could happen for sure. So, or what if the internet slows down, or what if blah, 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 all these kinds of things. So definitely, I would say there's something called Murphy's Law. If you haven't heard of it, it's anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So plan for that. Plan, if you can. Plan for, if this device craps out or this internet connection, I can go run to my neighbor and I can log in and I've got their device and I can do it outside their home, so I'm social distancing or whatever it is. Figure out if you can have a backup plan so that you don't have to come up with that backup plan, because it will take more than 5 minutes for you to come up with that. So I don't know what that would look like. What I do know is that if you have technology issues, please let me know. We need to also let College Board know as well. We need to let Mr. Green know. There might be hotspots we could get you. There may be other kinds of ways. There's like loaner devices apparently that they can give out. So, if that's an issue, if that's what you're worried about, you got to start voicing that out, because we don't know who needs the help and who doesn't. Some of you guys are saying, I'm good, I got the perfect internet, I'm good to go. Some of you guys, it's not that case. So I would just say have the backup plan. That's the one major thing I would say. Okay, so let's keep going. And advice. Okay. Basically, preparing for the U.S. government exam is like any other exam that you've had in your life. You have to study. It doesn't matter that this is open note. I mean, you still need to know this stuff to be able to pass this. It's still going to be hard questions. It's still going to be difficult application of knowledge and all that kinds of stuff. So, I think 1 out of 100, that super small 1% could maybe pass without, going back to this, but it's very, very rare. You're going to have to study on this. You create a study plan. It's going to look different for all of you. Got to think about big picture though. Don't focus like, oh, I don't understand the specific key term, that kind of thing. I mean, it's going to be more big picture stuff is what I would say. I mean, definitely hit me up if you have any questions or anything like that, but don't worry if there's like a specific thing that you don't understand or whatever. Big picture, I would say, look at that. Your goal always, you don't have to be perfect. You might not be able to answer one of the questions and be like, oh, then I failed. No, not necessarily. You never know where you could harvest points out of there. So I would say, just keep trying, right? They can only grade you on what you put on the page. And don't be afraid, because what's the worst that could happen? You just don't pass. Who cares? Try to harvest as many points as you can possible, basically. Keep going on that exam, and then use every minute you have, basically. So strategies for free response questions. Always over-explain, over-describe. That's nothing new. I've been telling you that forever. The first step to be successful is understanding what the question is asking. Because so many of you guys, you do this in macro too. You're like answering another question and you're right. Like, I'm like, oh, that's good information. But then I'm like, oh, but that's not the question I'm asking. Like, you're telling me about the Supreme Court and I'm asking about Congress, that kind of stuff. So for example, if you're asked to discuss the implications of PACs, you won't get the full credit for just saying what a PAC is. Oh, a PAC is this. Great. What are the implications of it? What happens? Why do PACs matter? And then some of you guys right now are like, what are PACs? Which is why exactly you need to study, for sure. Don't worry, we'll go over that. But they're the political action committees. So they raise the money, remember? So anyways, this is only part of the answer. The rest of your answer has to go in your interpretation or understanding around that, with examples, with scenarios, with the hypotheticals, that kind of stuff. Always good. The more you explain, the more you describe, the more that we're like, yep, yeah, they got it. They definitely understand what PACs are, for sure. They're not just copying it off of a definition thing. Oh, they're bringing back information from the scenario and relating it and saying that's like this. Ooh, we like that kind of stuff, for sure. Circle the verbs. No. Am I being asked to explain, describe? That's usually what they ask. And the key to doing well in the free response questions is basically to reading it correctly. So usually, like I said, explain, describe, compare kind of thing. Usually stuff you see. So what are the do's and don'ts? Write as neatly as possible. If you're handwriting, if you're typing it, then you're good to go. Do not worry about typos. Don't worry about correcting those. As long as we know what the word is in general, you're fine. If you want to try to go back and correct those later. But don't worry about that kinds of stuff. It does not matter. We see them all the time. So not a big deal. Read the question and then read it again and make sure you think about what you're going to write. Don't start writing right away. If you're going to just take 1 minute, outline your answer and go, I'm going to talk about this and this, like my argument essay. This document's about this, so I should write about this, this, and this. That think time while you think while you think that think time might be wasted time, it's really not. Because what I've noticed even if just from my experience as a reader is I've seen students start to argue one thing and they're like writing it out. And then all of a sudden, this happened a couple of times where I read it and they're like, actually, as I'm writing it, I'm realizing the other argument is better. So I'm going to just erase all this stuff and go to this new argument. I'm chuckling at that because I think it's funny. And we're not, it's just supposed to be, this is the stuff that they're supposed to read. So that's cool. So that's totally fine. So in that case, I'm like, well, that kid would have been better off if he just takes some think time and it really helps you out for sure. Okay, so reread your work and make sure you've answered each question fully and correctly and have you appropriately linked it back to the question. Read it if you have time. If you have time, you're not in that 5-minute upload window, reread it, make any changes. You can add anything. It doesn't have to be in a perfect order. Don't worry about topic sentences, anything like that. All the stuff that your English teachers hammers you on and nicks you and dings you for, do not worry about. It does not count. Spelling doesn't count. Grammar doesn't count. Don't worry. Give yourself some time though, so you can just read your answer. Use the exact vocabulary in the test as well. Remember, no penalty for wrong information. Okay, let's go to the don'ts. What are the don'ts that we don't want to do? We don't want your personal opinions. Don't give them because we don't care. I love your personal opinions normally, but in an FRQ, no, because you're not going to get any points for them. Don't give long unnecessary introductions. Don't just restate the prompt. Some of you guys feel comfortable with that. That's fine, but you really got to be quick with that. Don't spend a lot of time with that. AP is answer the prompt. It's not restate the prompt, basically. Don't spend too much time on one question. And then make sure you've answered every part of every prompt and then fight that fatigue. Fatigue will be less of a factor for this just because it's a shorter test window though. So it won't be too much of an issue, hopefully. So what are the big ideas for this course? The big main overarching ideas. The first one is constitutionalism. So what is constitutionalism? It's the idea that we have a constitution, our form of government that has checks and balances, and we also have federalism. We also have a separation between the federal and the state governments. If you turn on the news and anything about the coronavirus, you're seeing governors and they're acting out, and you're seeing the president and he's trying to act out and all this kinds of stuff. You're seeing the examples of federal and state governments sometimes working positively together and then other times not working positively together and trying and counteracting each other and conflicting each other. And that's nothing new. That's federalism. It's just basically, couched around this new crisis and stuff like that. Also that we have a system based on the rule of law of majority rule, but also minority rights, basically. So majority rule is important, but we also want to protect the rights of minority. Also, key idea in Federalist number 10. Okay, next one is liberty and order. This is more stuff from Unit 3. This is basically the idea of like, hey, we want liberty, but we also want order and safety, and we want to make sure that we're being protected and that kind of stuff. We have a government to both protect our liberties, our freedoms, but also to protect our lives and our safety and that kind of stuff. And interestingly, I was just watching in Michigan, they put a much stricter ban on about like public outings and stuff like that. And a bunch of people went out and protested. Basically, we're like, hey, we're going to be outside, which is interesting because the government is saying, hey, for your safety and everyone's safety, we're asking you to stay inside. And they're like, no, my liberty is more important. And it's an interesting debate and discussion, and how strict is too strict. And for me, I don't have a problem with the, staying at home and that kinds of stuff because I understand, I feel like I believe and trust the science and doctors around it who say that if I stay home, I'm protecting myself and I'm helping stop the spread to other people and that kinds of stuff. But there's other people who who even agree with that, but still feel like they don't want the restrictions on them and that kinds of stuff. So where's the balance basically? And that's really an opinion thing for sure. Okay, civic participation in a representative democracy. So key ideas, popular sovereignty, that we the people have the power, that we are individuals and that we honor the individual, that we don't just, we don't say USA is more important than the individual. No, we're just as important as the United States as a whole. And then republicanism. By that, they're not saying republicanism like the political party. They're saying like basically representative government, basically. And then also, all of those are like considerations in our policies and our lawmaking, and we assume that citizens will engage and participate through voting, through joining political parties or interest groups or protesting, all those kinds of ways that they participate, basically. That there's also multiple competing policymakers, that you've got the president, the Congress, the courts, you've got the states and the federal governments and the local governments, and you've got interest groups and political parties and all these people who, that's what politics is. Who gets the chips? Remember day one, I did a bag of poker chips and I was like, hey, who gets the chips? And you were like, I should get them, that kind of stuff, right? That's what politics is. It's multiple people competing for influence on policy in our laws, basically. And then the last one is methods of political analysis, using various types of analyses. Political analysts measure, political scientists measure how U.S. political behavior, attitudes, ideologies basically are shaped by a number of factors over time. That one I don't think will be so important because that's mostly in Unit 4. So I would say those first 4 big ideas, I can definitely see parts of those within Units 1 through 3, but that last one I would say is less important as I'm reading it right now. Okay, so what's the difference between formal and informal? Quick thing. Formal is basically in the Constitution, directly in there. We can see it. I can read it. I can, write it and all that kinds of stuff. Like the president was saying something the other day. He was like, I have the power to do that. And so I was like, where in the Constitution does it say that? And in my head, I'm like, yeah, he doesn't have the formal power. He's saying he has the informal power, but it's not explicit. We know that if it's a power, that it would definitely be an informal power because it's not directly stated that he has the power to like shut down the country and the word virus or corona does not appear in the Constitution. So we know that anything around that is not going to be formal. So what is formal? The Congress is formal. They make the laws, basically. They're a legislative branch. What else? The president, the executive branch, they enforce the laws. The bureaucracy, they execute the law. They help the president carry out the laws, basically. The courts, they interpret the law. Federalism, basically the idea that we divide the power between the federal and the state governments. Our informal institutions are developments outside the Constitution, basically. So what are some of our informal institutions? Basically the structure of our elections. That's not really defined by the Constitution. That's really determined mostly by states. There are some federal rules around that, but mostly determined by states. Interest groups, not mentioned in the Constitution, but they're definitely important in policy making. And the rest is political culture, political parties, and I think public opinion. I can't read one of them because it's blocked for me, but informal institutions basically outside the Constitution. Oh, I think media, that's what that was. That probably was media. Okay, so who governs? Basically, that's, like I said, the formal governs, and you've also got the non-governmental. That's just to separate in your head. I would just read this real quickly and go, okay, yeah, I know that they're not part of the government, but they do influence policy, like the media or the people who are actually directly in government and who influences it. So what are our institutions and what are their processes? This would be a good thing to review because this is the kind of stuff that you would see in that concept application question. Like we did one for our, the final that we took. And it was an interest group and they were endorsing a candidate. So, campaigning, basically running for office, that kinds of stuff. So good idea to just look through this stuff. Do I know all of these? Do I know who interacts with what of these, that kinds of stuff? Really good way to just review that kinds of stuff. Okay, important amendments. So basically, I don't worry about memorizing these now. You can have a list of these. So I don't think they're going to really ask you about the specific amendments because that's a lot of recall stuff. You could use an amendment though to defend in your document, in your argument essay. So do remember that if you can think of something, you go, oh, I remember that if you're thinking you're writing essay, I remember there's an amendment that actually relates to that. And you have your list handy, then that's, really well. So I wouldn't really worry about remembering these, but I do have a list of them right there for your viewing. That's again, the foundational documents again, because they are super important this year. So I put them in 2 spots so you wouldn't miss them. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here because this has already been really, really long already. And so I will create another video for Unit 1. This first one is basically was just going to be for the first chunk of that Google slideshow, basically. So I will create another video probably right now for Unit 1, but you can find that in a different spot. So